Good morning, everybody. This is Logan. I know that there is this next Sunday we're going to meet again in the annex. We're going to worship in the annex, and so um, I wanted to continue the study that I was doing and with everyone who was participating in that through the book of Hosea. And I felt like the best way to do that was to, instead of preaching through Hosea, maybe just convert it to a study or a podcast to where we can do that. And so, if hopefully that is of interest to you, and we can explore the scriptures together. We get to Hosea chapter 5, and we have discussed kind of this battle that has been taking place between Israel and sin, and Israel is losing the battle. And in losing the battle, they are rejecting God as their king. They're rejecting God as their leader. They're rejecting God as their God. And in turn, the blessings of God that are promised to Israel, when you reject God, you reject his blessings. And that makes it a very difficult situation for Israel, because when bad things start to happen, they wonder, well, where's God? Well, you're the one that pushed him out of your society. You're the one who kicked him out. And so he's exactly where you put him, outside of your life. And so we need to be very careful that we also do not do that, and in attempting to get God out of our lives. So how do we get God out of our lives? Not that we want to do that, but if we were going to do that, what would that look like? Well, it would look like not going to church, not attending services, not going to Bible class, not studying the scriptures, not praying. When's the last time you prayed? When's the last time you closed your eyes and you said a prayer? Maybe you didn't have to close your eyes. Maybe you were driving in your car. Maybe you were going somewhere. Maybe you were in the grocery store. When's the last time you prayed? When's the last time you talked to God? When's the last time you read scripture? I mean, just sat down with the Bible in your hands and read. It's amazing what you can glean from the Gospels if you'll just sit down and read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The wisdom that you can get. One day I was in a cafe, and I just started reading through the book of Jeremiah, and I don't know how many chapters I got in. I probably only got into like chapter 2 or 3, because every other paragraph I was just stopping and thinking, wow, that is so profound. And it really is. And so you don't have to sit down and read large chunks, large sections of scripture. Read a little bit, meditate on it. Maybe you read it in the morning. And so what does it look like to get God out of your life? Well, when's the last time you did that? Have you been doing that? Have you been worshiping God? Have you been praying to him and things like that? So, is it possible for us to push God out of our lives, even if we call ourselves Christians? Well, yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly what Israel did in being disloyal to him. And so in chapter 5, verse 1, it says, "Hear this, O priests. Take heed, O house of Israel. Give ear, O house of the king. For yours is the judgment, because you have been a snare to Mizpah, and a net spread on Tabor. The revolters are deeply involved in slaughter. Though I rebuke them all, I know Ephraim, and Israel is not hidden from me. For now, O Ephraim, you commit harlotry. Israel is defiled." So the first thing that God is doing here in chapter 5 is he's calling them out. He's name dropping, you might say. Yes, I'm talking to you, he's saying. Don't turn to your neighbor. Don't, it's like, I feel this way sometimes. I think I said in a sermon one time, don't turn to the person next to you in the pew. Don't think, wow, I wish so-and-so were here to hear this. No, God is talking to you. And this is, maybe it does apply to your friend who didn't come to services today. But whether it applies to them or not, that's not who that's not who you need to concern yourself with right now. Who you need to concern yourself with is yourself. God is speaking to you. Now listen up, God says in chapter 5 and verse 1. Judgment is coming. Are you ready for it? That's a universal question. Are you ready for it? Israel was not ready for it, because when judgment came, they got swept away in the judgment by the Assyrians. Now, when the Assyrians went and knocked on Jerusalem's door, Hezekiah, even though he was intimidated and scared of this very intimidating force, he went to God and he brought the problem before God, and he laid the problem at the Lord's feet. And what did the Lord do? He answered the problem, and he took the problem away, and he shouldered the problem so that Israel didn't have to shoulder the problem. And that's when 185,000 Assyrians were killed in one night. The battle was won. Who won the battle? Well, God won the battle. And so you and I go through our lives battles on a daily basis, and we think that we have to win every battle. That's not really a reasonable assumption of ourselves, and if we put that on ourselves, we're going to get extremely overwhelmed and intimidated, just like Hezekiah was. The alternative, and the more logical alternative, is to take that to God, because God is able to deal with it. Is able to resolve it, and sometimes we just need to put things in his hands. And so God is saying judgment is coming. Are you ready for it? And he says that the reason, because in verse 1, the reason why. See, it's one thing to just be a sinner, we're all sinners. It's another thing altogether to influence people with our sin. And we talked about this a little bit in the sermon. This is extremely important. As a matter of fact, I don't want to stretch it out too much, but I would almost go as far to say that this is probably one of the most important things that we as Christians can think about today, and that is our influence on the world around us. It is amazing to think that my behavior can affect the decisions that the people around us will make. For example, if I am disrespectful to an individual, and that person says, I don't like that guy, or I don't like her, and for that reason, they never come to church. They never even try to seek the Lord. Wow, That's like we have closed that door for them. And you might say, well, there's still no excuse for them. Okay, that's fine, but what if God could have used us, which we know he could have. What if he could have used us to get that person the knowledge of God, and now because of the way that we've disrespected them or the way that we've treated them, they never will? I mean, do we understand the gravity, the weight of the implications of that? It's like that person needs to seek and find the Lord, and because of the way that we behaved and because of the way that we acted around them, it turned them off so strongly against Christianity and against God that they could suffer for all eternity in condemnation because of what we did. That's something that we need to really think very strongly about in every encounter that we're in. This isn't one of those things if it's, Bible related or not. It has nothing to do with that. And you might say, well, I'm fully justified in behaving the way I behaved. Okay, but it could have potentially cost an individual's soul. Is your pride that important to you that you're willing to push someone, potentially discourage someone, potentially to the point that they would go to hell just because you want to keep your pride intact. Wow, there's something to chew on. There's something to meditate on. There's something to think about in every aspect of your life when you're at a store and you're not getting good customer service. Hey, I know what that's like. I was at a store last week, and I felt like I was getting a horrible customer service. Yeah, and what's the first thing I wanted to do? I wanted to go in there and tell people off. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to tell people how they weren't running their store well, and how they weren't managing their staff well, and how they weren't coordinating the lines well. There was 100 people in line, and there was only one line open. Yeah, I felt like I could fix all of their problems. But you know what? If I had gone in there and acted unchristlike and told people off and told people maybe what they needed to hear in that regard, would that really have benefited them in ever wanting to seek after the Lord? No. But what if I acted with grace? I acted with patience, by the way, which are two aspects, qualities of God that we are immensely thankful for. And so if we're walking as Christ walked, if we're being imitators of God as dear children, Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 1, the only authority that you have as a Christian in those situations is to give grace, is to be forgiving, is to be patient. Did you know that? You actually don't have the authority to fix all of their secular problems. What about the waiter or the waitress that does it wrong, and you feel like you're obligated to complain to them? I've seen preachers do this. I couldn't believe it. I was like, are you kidding me? You'll get in the pulpit and you'll preach humility and grace and patience and long suffering and all of these important godly traits. But then when you get aggravated, you get to act however you want to act. Well now. And it's amazing. Here's what we're talking about. It's amazing what that influence could potentially do on an individual. If they're already Christian, let's say they're a Christian of a denomination, it very well could encourage them to continue to be more firm and strong in their denominational beliefs. Because that's their anchor, that's their center. And they go, this is where I need to be. I responded well to this individual, and this individual, there's no way that this individual is a Christian. Or it could influence an individual away from God and away from Christ to begin with. I don't know about you, because there's a lot of things we don't know and there's a lot of things that we can't know. But if we stand before God on Judgment Day and God showed us a list of all of the people we persuaded to not seek after him, what would that list look like? Would it be long? How many people have you yelled at and told off in the church or out of the church? How many people have you yelled at, gotten angry at, and mistreated and disrespected? How many people have you said things to that you should not have said? I know I have. No matter how long that list is, I am so glad that even though I have not exhibited grace in my life, God exhibits grace to me, because without it, I would be completely lost. But here's the point. God is telling Israel in Hosea chapter 5, you are influencing people to sin. You are influencing people away from me. And that is the reason you are going to be judged. You see the word because there in chapter 5 and verse 1, because you have been a snare to Mizpah and a net on Tabor. And so in verse 2, there's murder, there's a slaughter. And God is saying, I've corrected you. I've rebuked you. In other words, you know better. It's one thing for you to go off and sin and not know better, but you do know better. It's like my son who, when he was young, he used to open his drawers and he used to pull out all the clothes and he would just sprawl these clothes all over the floor. It drove me crazy, and I told him, son, you got to quit doing that. But he was really young, and so he did it again. And he's like, I'm like, you're not getting it. And so he did it again, and he probably has done it 3 times. He eventually stopped. Thank goodness he grew out of that phase. But what could I do? He didn't know any better. He wasn't at the point where he could grasp that you're not supposed to do that. Now, if he were to go in there and do it, I would get on to him and probably punish him even more than he did when he was really young, because now he knows better. Now he knows what is expected of him. God's saying, you know what is expected of you. And it's not too much to ask. And so in verse 3 he says, I know you. You can't hide yourself from me. I know who you are. I know where you live. I know your behavior. And so, when we go to church and then we leave the church and then we go out into the world and we're on our own. And so, I would never yell at somebody in the assembly, but boy, when I leave that assembly, I can treat people however I want to treat you. God says, I see you though. I know what you're doing. I know how you're behaving. I know how you're talking to people. I know if you're respecting or disrespecting people. You know what? I want to expand that a little bit, because it's more than just respecting other people. It's respecting other people, and it's respecting yourself. I think that's extremely important. You have to respect yourself as well. You're not going to do things to harm yourself and hurt yourself. And then also you're going to respect other people's stuff. Because when you disrespect other people's stuff, you disrespect them. So all of these things are going into becoming a good influence on people, is because we're the kind of people that people are drawn to. Now let me ask you a question. Are you the kind of people that people are drawn to? Well, if you don't exhibit grace, if you don't exhibit patience, if you're bitter and pessimistic, then let me answer it for you. No, you're not. People don't want to be around that. People don't want to be around that kind of intense pessimism. And if they do, then they struggle with that pessimism as well. And the last thing they need is to be around someone that will cause them to be pessimistic. It's like a smoker that's trying to quit smoking. The last place you need to be if you're trying to quit smoking is around other smokers. It's about influence on you. You're trying to quit. And so God is saying, I know you. You're not hidden from me. Which makes me think that the people of the time were going, well, where is God? Now let me ask you a question. Does anybody ask that question today? Absolutely. What is an atheist? It's someone who's asked, where is God, and got no answer. What's an agnostic? It's someone who's asked, where is God, and is unsure of the answer. What is a Christian? A Christian is someone who's asked, where is God, and he's found him. She's found him. Found him in the words of his inspired book. Found him in the perfect design of nature. Found him in philosophy. Found him in science. Found him in all things in life point to a creator God. It all starts with asking the question, where is God? And so here they are asking, where is God? And God's saying, I'm right here. And I see you. and I know exactly what you're doing. And he says you're sinning. And you're defiled, you're corrupt. You're not pure, you're not holy. You were created to be pure, you were created to be holy. You were Christian, you were called to be holy and to walk in love. I see you though, and I know that that's not true. Would God say that to you? I hope not. Would he say it to me? Oh, I hope not. But that's why this study is so important. That's why this study is so important, is because we get to self-evaluate, which is the foundation of Christianity. Self-evaluation. Look at yourself. Look at your life. Look at the way you live. Look at the way you think. Look at the way you talk and walk. Self-evaluate. God already has you figured out. Do you have yourself figured out? Are you walking in the way he wants you to walk? Or is your behavior, your thoughts, is it corrupted? The thing about being corrupted is you're justified in your corruption. In other words, the behavior that you're committing, you legitimately think that it's okay. I mean, there may be exceptions to that, but if you're going out and you're doing bad things and you're doing bad things over and over again, there's a part of you that says, well, this is just who I am. I've done it this many times, surely I can keep doing it. I mean, if you get to a point where you don't feel shame for your sin, that's when you know corruption is there. You're defiled. The innocence is lost, the childhood, Jesus says, let the children come to me. The child does something wrong, and you look at them, this is, my daughter does this, she'll do something, and I'll just look at her in a particular way, and she'll just break down crying. She knows. And that feeling that she is feeling right there is better punishment than anything that I could do. I was just talking to my wife about this yesterday. The best thing that we can do for our children is to teach them to teach themselves, and to discipline them to discipline themselves. And so the reason why that's so important is because if you don't self-evaluate, you're going to walk down that path of justifying bad behavior, justifying sin, until you don't even think you're sinning anymore. You don't think you're doing anything wrong. And guess what? According to the world, you're not doing anything wrong. You're just living your life. You're just being you, they'll say. Well, who are we trying to be, though? Who are we? Now we have a problem of identity. God has called you to be His. He's called you to walk and live and imitate Him. Walk and live in His footsteps, in the footsteps of Christ. Well, why does He do that? Why does He call you to do that? Is it just because He wants you to he wants you to suffer or whatever? He wants you to, live in this rigid box? No, because it's a better life. It's a fuller life. It's a more satisfied life. That's why. It's good for you. Paul in Ephesians he reminds the people, children, honor your father and mother, for this is right. And this is in the 10 Commandments, but he says this is the first commandment with the promise. And what is the promise? The promise is that it will go well with you. And that's a promise. The promise is if you do it the Lord's way, your life is going to be so much better. your spiritual life is going to be so much better. Just in case someone says, "Well, I try to live like a Christian, and I'm not wealthy. I don't have nice things. I suffer a lot. There's a lot of tragedy in my life," which I'm sorry that those things are true. But we are surrounded with blessings every single day of our lives, and the Christian needs to be able to see those blessings no matter what state you are in. Give God the credit for those blessings no matter what state you are in. And to acknowledge that life without sin is worlds better, if not for the hope of being with God alone. Hope of being with God now and the hope of being with God into eternity. Someone who is corrupted will not be able to see those things. Someone who's corrupted will not care about how they are influencing someone else. Someone who's corrupted does not care about the judgment that is to come. They've already justified their way out of it. As a matter of fact, there's many people in the world that are like, well, if I'm going to hell, then good. That is a corrupted heart, a corrupted mind. It's been completely brainwashed to believe the lie. Someone who could commit a slaughter like he talks about in verse 2. Corrupted. Someone who sees the correction and the teachings of God and turns a blind eye. Corrupted. Someone who influences people to sin. Corrupted. Someone who can believe that God is not there and doesn't see what they're doing and is not going to hold them accountable. Corrupted. Is that us? Are we defiled? Are we corrupted? Are we pure? I hope we're pure. I hope we care. Because it's a better life. It's one that's not burdened with shame, as we talked about in verse 19 of chapter 4. It's a life that is not burdened with guilt of that sin. Again, corrupted is when you're defiled, you convince yourself that you're not guilty, right? Because when you're guilty, you feel guilt. Or you try to justify yourself, because when you justify yourself, then you're not guilty. But we can't justify ourselves. And so, what do we want to be? The opposite of corrupted. We want to be pure. We want to be holy. We want to be imitators of God as dear children, walking in love, walking in humility, walking in grace, not just in the grace that God gives us, but the grace that God gives. In other words, we want to exhibit grace towards other people, forgiving other people, patience, love.